Hey guys, my name is Steve, and this is my R32 GTST. That's a rear-wheel drive Skyline. I've had a lot of inquiries about the build and people just kind of wanting to know some more information. So I figured I'd make a short video just kind of giving everybody a bird's eye view of the entire car, and then afterwards I think I'll make a series of longer, more in-depth videos covering different parts of the build. But just to kind of start it out, this build has been about I would say a little over a year or so in the making. I owned another R32 GTST sedan before this for a few years, and that's kind of how I got into the Nissan Skylines, the R32s. Before that, I kind of always was into some sort of early to mid 90s Japanese muscle car, as you'd call it. My first car was a Nissan 300ZX 2+2 non-turbo. That car was fantastic. I thought it was the best, fastest car in the world that I had ever driven. Obviously, it was the first car that was mine, but I loved that car to death. As we all know, like the NA 2+2 300ZXs were not very fast by any means, but it was a great car, and it kind of got me into the whole scene, and specifically Nissans that had the VG30 D, I guess it was, right, the non-turbo model, and that thing was kind of a bear to work on. And I remember many cold winter days out there in the garage wrenching on that thing, bashing up my knuckles. But it was a great first car. I definitely enjoyed that. I've also had I guess it was a Series 2 MR2 for a short period of time. I owned a FDRX7. It was 1992 Touring Edition. Fantastic car, absolutely gorgeous, beautiful cars. Love it to death, still do. But at the time, my mechanical skill and knowledge and understanding of the rotary engines and turbo charged engines in general was just not up to par what was required for maintenance of those vehicles. So that was actually sold probably close to 10 years, 8, 9, 10 years ago or so, when we first moved into our house. And yes, I mean, I've kind of always had some sort of Japanese toy, like a Japanese muscle car from the 90s. So enter the R32 Skyline. Finished up working on the house after years of ownership, and we decided that it was time to get a little enjoyment back in life. So I actually went out looking for another FD. That was the goal, because I wanted to tackle that car again, and I always kicked myself in the ass for selling it. So started looking around, and an R32 sedan of all things showed up locally about half an hour away from me in Connecticut. And I figured, what the hey, let's go take a look at this. At the time, I hadn't had any knowledge about the R32 or the legality or import. We did do some research shortly after that to find out that they were illegal, and they just become legal. So I figured there's an R32 Skyline nearby, let's go take a look at it. So we drove over, took a look at the car. Looking back on it, it's probably the typical type of GTST that you're going to see, even GTR these days. It didn't really have any body work, body damage to it that was visible at the time. The wheel arches did not have any rust. It had the RB20 in it, minimal Japanese mods from the Japanese owner. The car ran okay, but had a stutter, a misfire under boost. I suspected that it was most likely the coil packs, and it turned out that was the case. So I made the guy an offer and came back, and I owned the car a week later. And over the course of, I think, 2.5 years or so, I ended up doing a RB29 Neo swap in that car. And at the time I did that, there really wasn't a lot of resources, you know, or walkthroughs or anything. So that was kind of something that I pushed through myself and kind of figured it out all by myself. That was before I was involved in any Facebook groups. And you guys, as you guys know, all the old SAU forums and Skyline ownership forums are kind of dead at the moment. But there just really wasn't a lot of resources out there for it at the time. But I swapped it in. I ended up using my RB29 harness, and I used Nistune to control the engine. We ended up dynoing it finally after we worked out all the issues and bugs and stuff that arose, and I made about 520 horsepower. I think at around 19 pounds of boost, running a GT3076R with a 0.83 rear. And it was a bit of a rocket. The car felt awesome. I'll never say anything bad about Nistune. I love the system. But at the time, I had not really had any experience with other engine management systems. Nistune was certainly attractive because of the price point. And I felt that there was a lot of things that I could easily tackle on there and do myself and learn. And I did. And I still think it's a phenomenal platform. And Matt from Nistune still offers updates and support on it to this day. I've just kind of moved along to the next level with this current build. But that being said, you guys might recognize my sedan. It was one of the, I don't know if it was the first or the only or whatever, but it was an R32 sedan that I had actually fitted a Pandem kit onto. The rear doors were non-functional, but the thing was badass. It looked great. It's now down in Florida, getting souped up by the owner now and getting ready to go on the track. So looking forward to seeing that on the track and doing what it's meant to do. But an opportunity came up about a year ago. A friend of mine from the Facebook group was selling a set of wheels that he had bought for his R32 Pandem project. I ended up buying those wheels. Those were the Ray's T57 V Mark IIs, specifically made for cars running wide bodies, so they have heavy negative offset, and they're big and they're 18s. So we ended up getting the I think they're 9.5s in the front. Was hoping that with the smaller wheel with the Pandem kit that we would have a little better clearance for the turning radius in the front, which seems to be a typical problem with these cars when you put the Pandem kit to them. And then the rears were 12-inch wide. Great wheels, absolutely great wheels. I had them on the sedan, was in love with them. So then the same guy who sold me the wheels ended up listing his Tomei Thai Extreme exhaust, and I snatched that up as well. And over the next few weeks, month or so, whatever, I started pestering him about the shell. I knew that he had the shell and he seemed to be selling off parts, and it turns out that he had just had his third kid and he needed to let the project go. So we worked out a price and I bought the shell. It was a rolling shell, no engine, no transmission, a lot of interior missing. I wasn't too concerned. I've been around these cars for a while, so I knew what would need to be done and what I'd have to put together. So we bought that. He actually had the Pandem kit still in the box, ready to go, so it was unfinished. So we got that too, and it's one of the miscellaneous things. And I trailered it back home, put it in the garage, and that was kind of the beginning of this year-long project, which is still going on and changing and evolving as time goes by. So shortly after I realized that there was just no garage space whatsoever for two cars in my small garage, I ended up selling the sedan to a gentleman in Florida who mentioned previously. And then I had room to start tearing apart the new R32. And the biggest thing about this thing that I really was, I wanted was it was a coupe. I love the sedan, but I'm a big dude. I'm 6'4", 240. getting in and out of those small doors was no easy task, especially with a cage in. And I wanted the coupe, bigger doors. I like the look better. It's more of the traditional, what you expect when you see a Skyline. And you get the tails, which are more traditional. And on top of that, there just seems to be much more aftermarket support for the coupe, at least in exterior styling and aero, than there is for a sedan. So that was kind of the reason why we switched over, and the idea of starting from a rolling shell and doing everything from the ground up, what I wanted to do, was very attractive. And for me, like, it always has been, like, I enjoy ownership of my cars, and I enjoy working on them and seeing them evolve almost as much as I enjoy driving them. So I always like having things to do with my cars. It's you got to have a hobby in life. That's mine. So okay, so now we have our coupe in the garage. The sedan is gone. What are we going to do with this thing? So I had kept my engine from my sedan. That's what I was going to use to build, for the coupe. And the original idea was to tear it down, take a look at it and see what the internals, see how they looked. At 530 horsepower, I just wanted to make sure that everything was solid. And I figured, while I had it out, I might do a forged build, just kind of like, a factory forged build, using maybe like your typical CP pistons, Manley rods, and do some ARP hardware in there, studs and stuff. Nothing really fancy. I just wanted to make the thing more or less bulletproof. So I tore it down, and to my, well, not so much to my surprise, but I mean, I was just kind of, it was remarkable to see that the internals of that engine looked like they just rolled off the factory floor. 530 horse for summer on that engine, having fun with it. The engine was absolutely fine. It was pristine. You'll never hear me say anything bad about an RB29 Neo. They were the pinnacle of the technological advancements for the RB series of engines. They came in the latest models like the R34s and the Stygias. They're fantastic. The bottom ends had a lot of things that were addressed to fix the shortcomings of the previous models, and the heads themselves, despite everybody thinking that they were built for emissions, actually flow a lot of air in their stock form, and they have solid lifters. They come with oil restrictors. It's a great head, absolutely great head to build from. So instead of jumping off and buying an RB26, I decided to stick with the RB29 Neo and build this thing up. I hadn't seen a lot of people do crazy builds of these things, so I decided I was going to kind of forge ahead and see what it would do. So I started looking at stroker kits, and then things just kind of like fell off in the deep end. There was a big discussion on whether or not I should buy the stroker, or if I should just go get an RB30 block. The RB30 is kind of like your stroked factory RB, and it would be easier in one sense, more difficult in another. After a lot of hemming and hawing and mauling, I decided that I was going to stroke my RB29 Neo. So I purchased a Spool RB29 stroker kit. I worked out my compression ratio with them, which is 9.5 to 1. I'm sorry, 9 to 1 compression ratio. And told them what I was doing with the bottom end, that I was using a Neo head, so we had custom pistons made, and got the kit ordered probably right around the same time that the whole pandemic was starting. So shipping speeds and manufacturing got slowed down quite a bit, and that's one of the things that I struggled with for the majority of the build. However, the Spool kit ended up showing up a few months later. It looked fantastic. It's a billet crankshaft, pistons and rods, where it looked great. I ended up getting King bearings. I know it's King and what's the ACL are the two major bearing manufacturers that people normally go with. I had read At the time, a few negative things about some quality control issues with the ACL. I don't know if they were real or not, but I have also another local builder who uses King Barons, and we decided to use the Kings. So I had assembled all my parts together for the bottom end, and the next step was obviously to find a machine shop to do this. It was attractive to me at the time to try to do this locally. I have a local buddy of mine who does a lot of assembly on RBs and actually races an RB in his S13, and he suggested a local machine shop. And I dropped everything off at the shop at the time, and we discussed what was going to get done. And there was a few things on the list that the machinist didn't feel super comfortable with or have enough experience with, one of which being the PRP block brace that I got for the bottom end. This was purchased because I know that the car was going to be, looking for some high horsepower numbers, and there's a lot of, I guess, torsional vibrations that can affect the block itself, specifically coming back from the drivetrain. And this is kind of like a weak point of the RB, and they can typically crack, especially under a lot of high horsepower torque. So the brace was ordered. And again, at the time, the brace is the one that does not have the main journals on it. At the time, the main journal version had just been released. And I was a little reluctant to jump on a new product. So I used the one that maintains the OEM girdle. And we went to a separate machine shop to get that fitted down in Westchester. And the guy did a fantastic job. He actually align honed the bottom end, installed, drilled, tapped everything in the bottom end for the brace, and it was perfect. Got it back to the other machine shop, which was doing the rest of my head build and the assembly, boring, the decking, and everything for the block. And I think that was probably right around the time that we had to send the parts out to get balanced. So the entire rotating assembly was sent out to get balanced. That had to go to Pennsylvania to a shop that my machinist recommended. And at that point, that was, I think, right around the time that all the lockdowns started. So literally it made it to PA, and it got quarantined at the shop down there. And I think it was at least a few months, I want to think like 2-3 months or something like that, where it was just stuck in PA. So my machine shop did a little work on the head, and I continued to bring in parts and stuff for other parts of the build, but we couldn't really do anything, for quite some time. So in the process, while we were waiting for COVID to kind of get a little bit better and get the parts back from the balancing shop, I started focusing on the body and other upgrades, removing weight, stiffening the chassis, some aesthetic stuff, some like the fuel system and everything. I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's try to stick on the engine build for the moment, though. So I think it was closer towards the mid-July or so, when maybe it was early July when he finally got the rotating assembly back. They started assembly on everything, got the head built up. So the head was built with the Kelford 244B cams, which is the largest cam that they offer that retains VCT. I believe it's a 264 intake cam with a 272 exhaust cam. And we had the Tomei cam cap studs. We had, Ferrea valves and springs, new retainers, everything that you do to build a head. It was cleaned, and the surfaces were decked because we were going to originally use a Nitto head gasket, so I wanted to make sure that everything was, to like a mirror finish. I had heard some stories about the Nitto gaskets being very temperamental with uneven surfaces, even the smallest amount. They want mirror finish. But we ended up using a Tomei head gasket anyways. But anyways, back to the engine build. The machine shop finished the assembly. Was able to go there for a final inspection, see everything, got everything written down, all the tolerances, clearances. And this being my first engine build, it was difficult. Somebody who's so hands-on usually with everything, doing my own work, it was difficult to have to rely on somebody else to make decisions and do the right thing and hope that what they did was what I needed to be done. But overall, I felt pretty confident that he had done a good job, and I still believe to this day that he was a good guy. He did a great job on all the machine work. There was a few issues with the assembly that were they caused some struggles for me down the line, but I don't want to say anything bad about him. He did okay in my eyes. I chalk this all up into the learning experience that you have to go through when you take on a project like this, especially when the project evolves at such a fast rate during the course of it. So got the block back. The block came back. Everything, like I had the extended sump from Aeroflow with it had an OEM pickup, but it had an extension on the pickup. Block brace installed, heads on, the Tomei head gasket. Everything's torqued down with ARP studs. And at that point, I believe that was the last piece of the puzzle that I was waiting for. So that immediately got attached to the T56 transmission that I'm currently running in the car. There was a shop called Silver Sport Transmissions. Shane Sullivan works there. He worked there at the time, and I believe he still works there. And he had just came up with a kit to attach a T56 to an R32. In an R32 to an RB engine. So I was like, that sounds pretty damn good, considering that that an RB29 transmission is not going to hold the type of power that I'm going to be throwing down at this thing. And at the time, the only other option that I was aware of out there that was relatively straightforward was going to be like a CD09 swap, which after doing a lot of research, I kind of came to the conclusion that those transmissions do hold power, but they weren't exactly meant to hold power. But they will, but they weren't meant to. And after pricing out, it seemed as though that it was kind of a no-brainer to do the T56. So we ordered that kit. That came with a QuickTime bell housing specifically for the RB. It came with a hydraulic release bearing. It came with the master cylinder. It came with the drive shaft all set up for the R32. So I mean, like, all in all, it was a pretty easy install. Very surprising. A lot simpler than doing the RB25 swap, really, in the R32. Coming from an RB20 transmission. We had the Siki T56 S13 transmission cross member ordered to hold this T56 up. And surprisingly, it fits damn near perfect. And it's kind of similar to the RB25 cross member in the R32. All that had to be done was to extend the cross member towards the front and add additional holes to get the second set of bolts into the chassis. So that was surprisingly easy, and it's a fantastic gearbox. It is noisy. The whole thing about the bag of marbles shaking around inside the box, they call that sound the bag of marbles. When you're in low load, it does sound like that. I was told that it will go away eventually. Not a big deal. I don't really care. But it does hold nice. Holds good power. And I don't think you ever have to worry about it until you bump up to the higher power levels. That being said, there's some things in the works at the moment to go to more serious gearbox, but we'll get into that later. So we have the RB now attached up to the T56, and We have our manifolds attached and everything. Everything is ready to go, and we dropped it in the car. And then really the next big project that I was working on was wiring. I had ordered a Haltech Elite 2500. I got this actually used, which ended up being a very, very poor decision at the time, and I don't think I'll ever buy used electronics again. It was from somebody from our Facebook group, and he was, pretty well known. And I had bought, I think it was the IQ4 Dash, Race Pack Dash, and the 2500 from him, along with I think like a wideband controller and some other things. Didn't think anything of it. Installed it in the car. I bought the Haltech premium unterminated harness, and then I spent the next probably 3-4 weeks or so wiring everything into the car. That was a bit of a task, something that I would not recommend unless you know what you're doing. And I can honestly say that after taking on such a big task like that, I've already learned many things that I would do differently and tackle differently if I were to do it again. And I do plan on doing it again. My idea being to switch over to like a mil-spec style harness and bulkhead connectors going to the firewall, along with some sort of like a sensor junction box mounted in the engine bay, kind of what you similarly see on race cars and stuff. But that being said, all the sensors in the car, every single last sensor was replaced with a Haltech sensor. Maybe stupid, I know you can get the sensors cheaper at different places, but I wanted everything to be exactly how it should be, and I wanted everything to work with that Haltech perfectly without question. So everything was wired up. I got a lot of PRP products, including their trigger kits, which I gotta say, top notch. I wouldn't go with anything else. I know like PRP stuff is expensive, but it's well worth it. You're spending for years of development and research, and they're doing the right things. So we did the PRP coil bracket with R35 coils. They provided the harness for that, and they also provide the other side of the plug to wire into your harness. We did the PRP trigger kits. Again, the Hall effect sensors on the top with the home sensor on the cam and the trigger on the crank. Great design. Million times better than stock, I'll tell you that much. Super easy to install, super easy to set the base timing. No issues there whatsoever. Absolutely worked perfectly. Couldn't be happier with any of that stuff. So we finished all the wiring, and I was able to kind of test stuff through the Haltech software, the EMS software, and kind of see, certain sensors were seeing what they were supposed to be doing, seeing what they're seeing. So we got to do some of that, but there was a certain bit of unknown with certain things that didn't appear to be working properly at the time. But I had such little time with the Haltech system, I didn't really know if it was just user error or just something I didn't understand entirely. So some of that stuff was kind of ignored, and I figured that I'd bring it up to the day when we get it started up, and we'd be able to resolve those things. Fuel system in the car is a radium spare tire 11-gallon fuel cell with their FCST. And when we started up at the first time, I believe I was just running 3 AAM 320s, one as a pickup and one as a primary and secondary. That's been upgraded since, and it's going to get upgraded again. All AN fittings, on everything. 8 AN feet, a PTFE line going under the car, and custom brackets that were made, and then a 6 AN return. Radium is absolutely top-notch stuff. Love their products. I am thrilled to actually be sponsored by them formally, and awaiting some of their new products to install in the car, including a new FCST to go in the cell specifically made for external fuel pumps. And that's going to be hooked up to the new fuel setup, which is going to be let's see, I think it's in the drawer here. Yes, the Kinsler. This is a 700 series mechanical fuel pump. that's going to flow a lot more fuel than I will ever need. But that's where you want to be. You always want to have more fuel than you need. So that's going to be going in very soon. And that's going to be installed with a new trigger kit from PRP to specifically hold that fuel pump on the exhaust cam. So looking forward to that. So engine is pretty much finished. We think we got it electronically where it needs to be. Fuel system is all set up. We're able to test prime the fuel system. There's no leaks. We're making fuel pressure set and everything. So this, again, being my first engine build, I'm like, all right, so we'll bring this to the dyno, to the tuners. I'm gonna have them do the first start, and we'll see how it goes. And I've been to a few dyno days before, and I know that nothing ever seems to go as planned. And you got to be ready for disappointment. And at the time, the complexity of this build and all the moving parts, which I haven't even scratched the surface with, is just absolutely insane. And I'm sure it's even more insane on other builds that are more track oriented and serious, but it's absolutely insane. Like, every part of this car was touched, manipulated in some way. Every piece of electronics and sensors and everything. There's just so many moving parts, more than one person is able to comprehend or stay on top of or understand completely. But again, I did my absolute best, and all things considered, I think I did a pretty good job. We worked through a few hiccups, but after that, I think that everything worked out pretty damn good. So to the hiccups, and if you guys know me or you're in the Facebook group, Outsider Skylines, I'm sure you're aware of the whole story with the startup and stuff, and it was kind of like a big news item for a little while, and I still get poked and prodded, joked and stuff. But so we went over. So let me just say too, like, I made my dyno appointment for my initial startup and tune about 4 or 5 months in advance. I set this date knowing that that was going to be my goal. I was going to have this thing finished by then, and nothing was going to stop me. So I ended up, I think, getting the car put together 100% with maybe like a week or two to spare. And I spent that last few weeks just going over as much as I could go over. And then it was the day to go. So I'd actually picked up a trailer, a 16-foot dovetail trailer, and I loaded on the Skyline, and we drove up to Selkirk, New York, to Quantum Raceworks, where I met Steve and Mike for the first time. Great guys, absolutely great. They know their shit. They know what's going on. Easy to talk to, easy to deal with. So I felt very comfortable, and I still do. Those guys are great. So they're going over everything. Steve is starting to go over the maps in Haltech and get some basic stuff set up and ready. Mike gives them a hand, and they get the initial timing set up. We pulled the coils and spark plugs out, and we turned the fuel injectors off, and they set the timing. And then the next task was to verify oil pressure. And the feeling that I had after we cranked it over a few times, and I looked at Steve's face, and Steve had this look on his face like, what the hell's going on here? It's like there's zero oil pressure, nothing, not anything. And I'm like scratching my head like, what's going on, So we cranked it over a few more times, and then I started to get a little nervous. I ended up calling the machine shop while I was there, and I was like, what's going on, man? I'm at the dyno right now. We're not making any oil pressure. And he assured me that the pump had been packed with grease, and we should just crank over until it goes. So we gave it a couple more tries. We tried priming it a bit from the oil filter housing. Nothing was taken, so I decided to cut it short and take it back and do some due diligence, strip it down, make sure everything was where it needed to be, and see if I could find the reason. I guess this is now, again, first build, so I'm learning all these things for the first time. Oil pressure is obviously extremely critical for any engine, more critical for a turbo engine, and if you don't have it, there's a reason why you don't have it, and you can't start a car without oil pressure. And I especially wasn't going to throw away the money that I had spent in the build. So I ended up bringing that car back home, and I think it was like a Wednesday or Tuesday or Wednesday I was up there, and I pulled the engine out that same Friday that week, right in my driveway. I had it out in 2 hours. Took the transmission off, got the engine up on the stand, and that night I had disassembled. I took the sump off, took the block brace off, and I was examining the bottom end. Didn't see anything wrong. Everything looked great. There was still, assembly lube and stuff, so there was no damage or anything done. So that felt good, but couldn't find the problem. So, I mean, obviously the first place that I should have looked, but you have to take the sump off anyways to get to it, was the oil pump. So that was next. Took the oil pump off, and the oil pump is dry as a bone. And you can tell that it hadn't been opened up, so there was no grease packed in it whatsoever. So that was kind of like disappointment number one, really. Such an easy thing overlooked during the process of the build, which caused a lot of turmoil and extra work, just because you don't know. And when you don't know, you can't afford to not know, so you have to find out. So I packed that pump up with Vaseline, put it back together, got it on the engine, reassembled the brace, retorqued everything, got the sump back on. By the way, that Aeroflow sump is an absolute bitch to get on and off. Would not recommend it. All back together, dropped it back in the car, hooked everything back up, all the electrical components, all the fuel system. And I figure there's no way I'm bringing this thing back up to Albany and wasting my time until I can verify that I'm going to get fuel pressure at home. So I crossed my fingers, and I hoped that packing this pump would do the trick. So pulled the coils out again, pulled the plugs out, crank it over, and within the first 3 seconds I had like 40 psi. Problem solved. Super easy, right? So that made me really happy, knowing that we were solid and that any problems lay ahead, at least they're not going to be mechanical issues. So from there, we kind of rescheduled another day to get back up, and that was a much better day. So we were able to get the car started, and that was like music to my ears, and I'm sure music to anybody's ears who hears their brand new engine start up for the first time. But hearing the cam lobe on the RB29, and it was phenomenal. And we had a couple small hiccups there that day. I had a very small oil leak coming from my oil block adapter, which I knew that there was going to be a problem with that I should have addressed. I ended up getting a new part replacing. Everything's fine now, obviously, but it was such a small leak that we just let it go. We just monitored the oil level and stuff as we tuned. But I think we put down about, just around, scratched like 500 horsepower or whatever on pump gas. Steve asked me if I wanted to go for more. I said, no, let's not even worry about it, because this is just a break-in tune. I want to get it running and make it so we can put some miles on it and break in the engine. So everything ended up being great, and I got to actually drive the car around and enjoy it a bit, and we made it down to the Northeast Skyline meet in New Jersey safely, there and back, and it was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So the car is running great, driving great, no major issues. I still am struggling with one small issue revolving around idle temperature starting to creep up, but I think I've resolved that now. But we can talk about that later at a different point. But car's running great now. Now the next step is to get it on some ethanol. So I think I put about 1,000 maybe 1,300 miles on this car over the course of August to, I think it was October. So not many, but I mean, I got it out as much as I could to work over the engine and break in the transmission and all that. So where we're sitting right now is the last time we went to the dyno. We had filled everything up with E98. We were going to push this thing up and see what this turbo is capable of. And we ended up having an issue with the auxiliary fuel pump relay not triggering properly, which is again something else that I should have checked, but I overlooked it and I didn't. Ended up becoming a dyno day problem, which sucks. But did get to see the car make over 700 horsepower briefly. I think it was about 25 psi or so. So I think it's safe to say this thing is going to freaking fly at like about 40 pounds. So we were really expecting somewhere, 950 to 1,000 horsepower, potentially more. There's always an option to go to a bigger rear end on the turbo. They make a 145, I believe. But I'm not sure. We'll see how things go, if it's worthwhile or not. These things, I mean, they take time. It's an investment in money and effort and more tuning time. And if we're only talking about breaking 4 figures, I mean, for me, it's not a pissing contest. I mean, I want this car to be solid, I'm not after specific numbers. I'm after good power, good reliable power with a good power band, a decent torque. And even at the 500 horsepower level at 16 pounds on pump gas, this thing feels like an absolute animal. It is so light and so rigid and low. It's like a rocket ship. So I have not driven it beyond that horsepower level yet, but I am extremely eager. And the first, nice weather we get, I'll make the trip back up to the dyno and we'll fill it back up with ethanol, and we're gonna send it to its limit and see what it does. But we'll be on a mechanical fuel pump then with no issues, with no pressure issues or whatever. And potentially some other upgrades as well. It depends on how time frames and stuff go at the winter. I'm in the process of trying to move out of this house to a slightly bigger house in a quieter spot with a bigger garage and more area to work on the car. And I have a number of other big upgrades that have to go into the car. We're going to be doing a dry sump. I think you guys saw the previous video with the Ross dry sump. So that's going to be going in. We're going to be doing the PRP Pro trigger at the 36.2. That's going to go in. The new home trigger is going to be going in for the mechanical fuel pump, the new radium FCST. So there's going to be some exciting things happening. This all alongside with more arrows coming. Professional Awesome is building me a custom carbon fiber splitter for the front of the car. And we're also going to be running some ductwork for brakes and potentially be doing a new, more aerodynamic time attack style front bumper. So we'll see how things go. But we're very excited to see this thing out on the track and give her a good formal shakedown and see what she does. I think I'm going to leave it at that for right now. I think that's probably taken off enough of your guys' time. But I'll dig in a bit deeper to specs on the engine and the chassis modifications, safety modifications, the fuel system, and more in-depth build on the engine very shortly. And we'll go from there. Thanks a lot, guys.